Chapter 1. A Different Name. Echoes of the Broken Crown. Chapter 1. A different name. The last thing Arjun remembered was rain. Not the dramatic kind that belonged in films. Just ordinary rain striking a windshield while traffic crawled along an overpass outside Bengaluru. His phone had buzzed in the cup holder. A message from work. Something about a deployment issue. Then headlights. A horn. Metal folding inward. And nothing. When consciousness returned, it arrived in fragments. A ceiling made of dark timber. The smell of herbs. A dull ache behind his eyes. Someone was crying. Arjun opened his eyes. An elderly woman sat beside the bed. Her hands were clasped together so tightly that her knuckles had gone white. The moment she noticed him awake, she gasped. "My lord." The words meant nothing to him. He stared. The woman burst into tears. Thank the stars. The language should have been unfamiliar. It wasn't. Somehow he understood every word. A second person hurried into the room. A middle-aged man wearing formal clothes stopped short upon seeing him awake. Lord Vale. Arjun tried to sit up. Pain flashed through his skull. Memories rushed forward. Not his own. A different childhood. Stone corridors. Horseback lessons. Names. Places. Years. They collided violently with the memory of apartment buildings, traffic lights, software development meetings, and late-night coffee. Arjun grabbed the side of the bed. The room tilted. The man moved forward. "My lord, Arjun swallowed. "I need a moment." The words emerged naturally. Not English. Not Hindi. A language he somehow knew. The realization settled with terrifying clarity. He was not in a hospital. He was not in India. And the memories crowding his head belonged to someone else. 3 days later, Arjun reached a conclusion he would never have believed possible. He was dead, or had died, or something close enough that the distinction no longer mattered. The body he occupied belonged to Lord Arjun Vale, a minor noble from the kingdom of Valoria. 28 years old. Unmarried. Known primarily for being quiet. Known secondarily for possessing modest lands along a trade route damaged during the recent civil war. According to everyone around him, Lord Vale had spent weeks suffering from a severe illness before unexpectedly recovering. Only he had not recovered. The original owner of the body was gone. Arjun remained. The situation would have been absurd if it weren't so undeniable. He tested reality repeatedly during those first days. The walls remained solid. The servants continued existing when he looked away. The memories of modern India never faded. Neither did the inherited memories of the nobleman whose life he now inhabited. Eventually, practicality asserted itself. Panicking would not solve anything. The world existed. He existed. That was enough to begin. The explanation he offered was simple. The fever had affected his memory. Not entirely false. People accepted it more readily than he expected. Apparently severe illnesses sometimes left lingering confusion. He learned to answer uncertainty with caution. "I don't remember clearly. I need time. The details are difficult to recall." Nobody questioned him aggressively. Most seemed relieved he had survived. Over the following weeks, he studied history, politics, customs, economics, everything he could find. Valoria had emerged from a devastating civil war only 2 years earlier. Entire regions remained damaged. Trade routes had collapsed. Population centers struggled with shortages. The royal treasury was strained. The ruling family had suffered catastrophic losses. The current regent, Princess Elara, governed in place of a younger cousin still considered too young to take the throne. Even written accounts avoided describing the war in detail. That alone told Arjun enough. Some wounds remained fresh. The summons arrived on a cold morning. A royal seal pressed into dark wax. Arjun read the letter twice. Then a third time. Lord Arjun Vale was requested to attend a strategic planning council in the capital. Infrastructure reconstruction, road restoration, supply management. The topics aligned perfectly with his inherited responsibilities. Unfortunately, they also involved interacting with people who might notice inconsistencies. He folded the letter carefully. There was no reasonable way to refuse. The capital of Valoria carried visible scars. Arjun noticed them immediately upon arrival. Entire districts appeared newly rebuilt. Some structures remained abandoned. Sections of the outer wall displayed different stonework where damage had been repaired. The city functioned, but it still remembered. People remembered too. The atmosphere felt different from any modern city he had known. Not fearful, watchful, as if everyone had learned that stability could disappear. The royal council chamber was smaller than he expected. A long table occupied the center. Maps covered nearly every available surface. Officials spoke quietly among themselves. Several military commanders stood near a wall. Arjun took a seat toward the far end. He listened, observed, waited. Then the room fell silent. Someone had entered. Arjun looked up. Princess Regent Elara crossed the chamber without ceremony. She was younger than he expected. 24, perhaps. Her dark hair was tied back simply. No extravagant jewelry. No unnecessary display of rank. Everything about her appearance seemed designed for efficiency. People rose. She acknowledged them with a brief nod, then took her place at the head of the table. The meeting began immediately. No speeches, no formalities, just work. Arjun found himself unexpectedly impressed. Over the next hour, he learned several things. First, Elara was extraordinarily competent. Second, she prepared extensively. Third, exhaustion hid beneath her composure. He noticed it because he had spent years learning to recognize strain in himself. Small signs. The tension held constantly in her shoulders. The way her attention never truly relaxed. The rapid scan of every doorway whenever someone entered the room. Hypervigilance. The term surfaced automatically from memories of therapy sessions years ago. Not proof of anything. Just an observation. Still, it stood out. So did another detail. During a discussion about rebuilding northern provinces, one counselor referenced casualties from the war. The room quieted briefly. Elara responded professionally. Her voice remained steady. Her expression barely changed. Yet something disappeared from her eyes for a moment. Not sadness. Not exactly. Absence. As if an invisible door had closed. Then she continued the conversation. Most people appeared not to notice. Arjun did. The meeting shifted toward transportation infrastructure. Trade roads. Bridges. Supply routes. Areas where Lord Vale's lands happened to be relevant. Elara turned toward him. Lord Vale. Every eye in the room followed. Arjun resisted the urge to sit straighter. Your Highness, the Eastern Road remains operational despite limited funding. Yes. How? The question was direct. No hostility. Just genuine inquiry. Arjun glanced at the map. Fortunately, practical problem-solving translated well across worlds. We prioritized maintenance over expansion. Several counselors frowned. He continued. A damaged road can still function. A collapsed road cannot. We repaired critical sections first and delayed less urgent projects. Silence. Then Elara nodded once. Reasonable. She studied the map. Could the same approach apply elsewhere? It depends on labor availability and local conditions. Prepare a proposal. Of course. The conversation moved on. Brief. Professional. Nothing remarkable. Yet Arjun noticed several officials exchanging looks. Apparently, the princess did not hand out approval casually. The meeting lasted another 3 hours. By the end, Arjun had developed a clearer impression of the woman ruling Valoria. She was intelligent, disciplined, careful, and carrying something heavy. Not visibly, not dramatically, but consistently. The signs appeared between moments rather than during them. A slight flinch when voices rose unexpectedly. The way she positioned herself where she could see every entrance. The measured distance she maintained from nearly everyone. Trauma, he thought. Or something close to it. Not a diagnosis. Just recognition. He remembered sitting across from a therapist years ago after losing his parents. Remembered learning how grief altered behavior. How fear sometimes stayed long after danger ended. Different circumstances. Different wounds. Some patterns remained familiar. When the meeting finally adjourned, officials began leaving. Arjun gathered his notes. A voice stopped him. Lord Vale. He turned. Princess Elara stood nearby. Close enough for conversation. Not close enough to feel personal. A deliberate distance. Your Highness, I reviewed reports from your territory. He waited. The reconstruction numbers were accurate. A strange compliment, but clearly intentional. Thank you. Most reports require verification. That's unfortunate. A faint expression touched her face. Not quite amusement. Something smaller. Governing awfulness. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she inclined her head. I look forward to seeing your proposal. You'll have it within the week. Another nod. Then she left. Simple. Professional. Nothing more. That evening, standing alone in his guest chambers, Arjun reflected on the encounter. He felt no sudden attraction. No dramatic fascination. No destiny. Only respect. The kingdom had survived a civil war. Its ruler looked exhausted. Yet she continued working. Meeting after meeting. Decision after decision. Holding together something fragile. He understood enough about responsibility to recognize the cost. Outside the window, the capital glowed beneath the fading light. Inside, Arjun unfolded a map and began outlining road repairs. The work mattered. The people relying on those roads mattered. And for the first time since awakening in a stranger's body, he felt something resembling direction. Not certainty, just purpose. For now, that was enough. End of Chapter 1.
Chapter 2, Foundations. Echoes of the Broken Crown. Chapter 2, Foundations. Arjun. The proposal took 3 days. Not because the problem was particularly complicated, but because Arjun spent most of those 3 days learning how reconstruction worked in a kingdom without modern machinery. Every instinct he possessed wanted to solve problems with technology that did not exist. No trucks. No heavy equipment. No concrete highways. Instead, there were labor crews, horses, timber, stone, and limited budgets. The constraints forced him to think differently. Oddly enough, he enjoyed it. By the time the document was complete, it contained practical repair schedules, supply estimates, labor allocation plans, and maintenance priorities. Nothing revolutionary. Just organized. Clear. Honest. The kind of planning most people ignored because it seemed boring. Boring, Arjun had learned, was often what kept systems functioning. A week later, he found himself back in the capital. The same council chamber. The same maps. The same lingering atmosphere of a nation trying to rebuild itself. Princess Elara arrived precisely on time. Not early. Not late. Exactly when the meeting was scheduled. Predictable. The observation lodged somewhere in his mind. He understood why. People recovering from uncertainty often gravitated toward routine. The discussion lasted most of the afternoon. Several nobles presented ambitious proposals. New roads. New fortifications. Expanded ports. Most required money the kingdom did not possess. Elara listened carefully. Asked questions. Requested evidence. Rejected assumptions. When Arjun's turn arrived, he presented his plan without embellishment. Repair existing routes. Stabilize supply chains. Improve travel reliability before pursuing expansion. A military commander frowned. It lacks ambition. Arjun resisted the urge to sigh. Ambition is expensive. A few people shifted uncomfortably. The commander looked annoyed. Growth requires investment. It does. Arjun pointed toward the map. But investment requires functioning transport networks. Merchants won't increase trade if roads remain unreliable. The commander opened his mouth. Elara spoke first. Continue. The room quieted immediately. Arjun continued. 20 minutes later, the proposal was approved. Not unanimously, but approved. Afterward, as officials filed from the chamber, Elara stopped beside him. You expected opposition. It wasn't a question. A little. Why? People prefer visible achievements. She considered that. Road maintenance isn't visible. Exactly. A faint hint of understanding crossed her face. The most important work rarely is. The statement sounded personal. Before he could respond, she was already moving toward another discussion. The meetings continued. Once a week. Sometimes twice. Nothing dramatic happened. No life-changing conversations. No instant friendship. Just work. Reports. Logistics. Budgets. Repairs. At first, Arjun assumed their interactions would remain limited to official matters. Instead, they gradually became familiar. Not close. Familiar. He learned that Elara always reviewed reports herself. That she preferred concise answers. That she disliked unnecessary ceremony. That she drank entirely too much tea. She learned that Lord Arjun Vale rarely exaggerated. That his estimates were accurate. That when he admitted uncertainty, he genuinely meant it. Trust did not appear suddenly. It accumulated. Meeting by meeting. Decision by decision. Elara most nobles lied. Not always maliciously. Sometimes they lied because they wanted approval. Sometimes because they wanted influence. Sometimes because they feared appearing incompetent. The reasons varied. The result remained the same. Elara spent much of her life determining which statements reflected reality. It was exhausting. Lord Vale represented an unusual exception. If he did not know something, he said so. If a project would fail, he said so. If a timeline was unrealistic, he said so. At first, she assumed it was a strategy. Eventually, she realized it wasn't. The realization made him useful. And increasingly rare. The nightmare arrived 3 nights later. Not unusual. Most weeks contained at least one. Some contained several. She woke before dawn. Breathing hard. Heart racing. The familiar sensation of danger flooding her body despite the silence of her chambers. For a moment she was 16 again. The palace burning. People screaming. Blood on marble floors. Her younger brother reaching for her. Then reality slowly returned. The war had ended. Years ago. She knew that. Her body did not. Sleep became impossible. Again. Also not unusual. Eventually she rose and dressed. The palace library remained open at all hours. Books offered distraction. Sometimes. Not always. Tonight, she hoped they might. The library was empty when she arrived. Rows of shelves stretched into darkness. Moonlight filtered through tall windows. The silence felt comforting. For a while. She found a table near the back. Opened a book. Read the same paragraph 6 times. Remembered none of it. The memories lingered too close. The dream had been vivid. Too vivid. The room suddenly felt smaller. Her breathing became shallow. No. Not here. Not now. She closed her eyes. Attempted the techniques her healer had taught her. Count objects. Focus on the present. Notice physical sensations. Sometimes it worked. Tonight it didn't. The panic surged anyway. She heard footsteps. Distant. Approaching. Her muscles tightened automatically. The reaction happened before thought. Always before thought. A figure emerged between shelves. Lord Vale. He stopped immediately. Noticing. Understanding something was wrong. Most people would have rushed forward. Asked questions. Demanded explanations. He did none of those things. Instead, he remained where he was. Several paces away. Far enough not to crowd her. Near enough to help if necessary. A deliberate choice. Neither spoke for several seconds. Then he sat down in a chair across the room. Not beside her. Across the room. Respecting distance. The gesture surprised her. His voice remained calm. Would you like me to leave? Simple. Direct. No assumptions. Elara struggled to answer. After a moment she shook her head. Another silence. Comfortable. Or as comfortable as panic allowed. I won't ask what's wrong. His gaze remained on the floor rather than her face. But I can stay. The words settled gently. No pressure. No expectation. Just an offer. Her hands trembled. Embarrassing. Frustrating. She hated being seen like this. Hated the vulnerability. The loss of control. Nightmare, he asked quietly. She nodded once. Again he didn't push. Didn't ask for details. Didn't offer solutions. He simply remained present. Eventually he spoke. Can you identify 5 things you can see? The question caught her off guard. A grounding exercise. A healer's technique. After several seconds she answered. A bookshelf. Pause. The west window. Pause. A candle. Her breathing remained uneven. But the panic had stopped escalating. He nodded. Good. Nothing more. No praise. No condescension. Just acknowledgement. The exercise continued. Slowly. Patiently. By the time 20 minutes passed, the worst of the panic had faded. Exhaustion remained. So did embarrassment. She stared at the table. I apologize. The words felt automatic. For what? This. A vague gesture. The panic. The weakness. The loss of composure. His expression changed slightly. Not pity. Something else. Understanding, perhaps. You don't need to apologize. Most people said similar things. The difference was that he sounded like he meant them. Another silence stretched between them. Not uncomfortable, just quiet. Finally, she asked, "How did you know the exercise?" For the first time, something flickered behind his eyes. A private memory. Gone almost immediately. "I've had experience with anxiety." The answer felt carefully chosen. True, but incomplete. She didn't press. Everyone carried things they preferred not to discuss. After a while he stood. "Would you like me to summon a healer?" The offer contained no judgment. "No." He nodded. "All right." Then he hesitated. Very briefly. "Your Highness." "Yes. The kingdom depends on your judgment." She waited. "That doesn't mean you have to handle everything alone." Not a lecture. Not advice. Just a statement. Something tightened unexpectedly in her chest. Not pain. Something softer. More complicated. Before she could respond, he inclined his head. Then left. Without waiting for thanks. Without turning the moment into something larger than it was. The library grew quiet once more. Elara remained seated, listening to the fading footsteps. For reasons she couldn't entirely explain, she found herself breathing more easily. Not because the nightmare had vanished. Not because anything was fixed. Nothing had been fixed. But for half an hour, someone had treated her like a person instead of a symbol. Not a regent. Not a survivor. Not a political necessity. Just a person having a difficult night. The realization lingered long after he was gone. And though she didn't know it yet, that quiet encounter in a dark library would become the first real stone laid in a foundation neither of them had intended to build. End of Chapter 2. Chapter 3. Consistency. Echoes of the Broken Crown. Chapter 3. Consistency. Arjun. The encounter in the library stayed with him longer than he expected. Not because it had been dramatic. Quite the opposite. Nothing remarkable had happened. A woman recovering from unimaginable trauma had experienced a panic attack. A second person had remained nearby until it passed. That was all. Yet the memory lingered. Perhaps because he recognized parts of it. Not the cause. The feeling. The helpless surge of fear that ignored logic. The way the body sometimes refused to believe the danger was over. His own experiences had been milder. Different. Years earlier. Still familiar enough. He spent the following morning reviewing reconstruction reports. The eastern supply route remained behind schedule. A bridge project required additional timber. 3 villages reported shortages of laborers due to poor harvests. Ordinary problems. Solvable problems. Arjun appreciated solvable problems. They did not wake people in the middle of the night. By the time he returned to the capital the next week, he had nearly convinced himself the library incident would never be mentioned again. He was wrong. The council meeting ended shortly before sunset. Officials gradually dispersed. Documents disappeared into leather cases. Maps were rolled away. Arjun gathered his notes. A familiar voice stopped him. Lord Vale. He turned. Princess Elara stood beside the table. Professional as always. Composed. No visible sign of the woman who had struggled to breathe in a dark library. "I wish to thank you." The statement surprised him. For what? The other night. He considered dismissing it. Instead, he answered honestly. "You don't owe me thanks." "Perhaps not." A brief pause. "But I wanted to offer it anyway." There wasn't much to say after that. So he inclined his head. She did the same. The conversation ended naturally. Neither tried to make it more significant than it was. As he left the chamber, Arjun found himself oddly relieved. The easiest way to damage trust was to demand recognition for basic decency. He had seen it happen before. People performed kindness and expected repayment. Support became obligation. Help became leverage. Nothing healthy survived that transformation. Fortunately, Elara seemed to understand the difference. The weeks passed. Winter settled across Valoria. Road conditions worsened. Construction slowed. Administrative work multiplied. Arjun discovered that rebuilding a kingdom involved astonishing amounts of paperwork. Not literally paperwork. Parchment work. The principle remained the same. Someone always needed approval. Someone always needed funding. Someone always believed their project deserved priority. His correspondence with the capital increased. At first it involved formal reports, then questions, then occasional discussions that stretched beyond immediate logistics. One evening, while reviewing transportation maps in a small conference room, Elara frowned at a report. The southern route appears stable. It is. Then why have merchant taxes declined? Arjun studied the numbers. A few moments later, he pointed toward a neighboring region. The route is stable. Yes, the market isn't. Understanding appeared almost immediately. They're bypassing the city. Exactly. For a brief moment, her expression brightened. Not dramatically. Just enough to reveal satisfaction at solving a problem. The look vanished quickly. But Arjun noticed. He was beginning to notice many things. Elara trust was dangerous. The lesson had been reinforced repeatedly throughout her life. Trust created vulnerability. Vulnerability created opportunities for betrayal. The logic was simple, difficult to argue with, especially when experience supported it. Yet over the past several months, she found herself relying on Lord Vale's reports without verification. The realization arrived unexpectedly and unsettled her. Not because he had done anything suspicious. Because he hadn't. He remained predictable. Consistently so. If he promised a report on Thursday, it arrived Thursday. If he believed a proposal would fail, he said so. If he disagreed, he explained why. No manipulation. No hidden requests. No attempts to gain favor. The reliability felt unfamiliar. One afternoon, her chief advisor entered her office carrying several documents. He set them on the desk, then hesitated. What is it? The older man cleared his throat. There's concern regarding marriage negotiations. Of course there was. There was always concern. Elara leaned back slightly. Which negotiation? All of them. She closed her eyes briefly. Several neighboring kingdoms had expressed interest. Some openly, others indirectly. The political logic was obvious. Valoria required stability. A marriage alliance offered advantages. Unfortunately, politics rarely cared about readiness. Tell them the matter remains under consideration. They won't be satisfied. No, they'll continue pushing. Yes, the advisor studied her. Concern lingered behind his professionalism. You don't have to decide immediately. The statement surprised her. Most advisors advocated the opposite. No, she said quietly. I don't. After he left, she stared at the window for a long time. Marriage, partnership, intimacy, trust. Each concept felt distant. Not impossible, just inaccessible. Like something that belonged to another version of herself. The war had taken many things. Not only people. Certainty, safety, the ability to relax. The assumption that tomorrow would resemble today. Sometimes she wondered whether those losses could truly be recovered, or merely managed. Her healer insisted recovery was possible. Gradual. Incomplete. Real. Elara wanted to believe her. Some days she did. Others proved more difficult. Arjun, 3 months after the library incident, Elara requested a private meeting. The invitation immediately triggered several political concerns. Fortunately, none materialized. She simply wanted advice. Specifically, advice about implementing reconstruction oversight programs. Arjun arrived with notes. She arrived with twice as many. For nearly 2 hours they discussed budgets, accountability systems, labor shortages, and regional planning. The conversation remained entirely professional. Yet by the end, something had changed. Not the relationship itself. The comfort level. They no longer needed formal pauses between every exchange. No longer measured each sentence quite so carefully. The distance remained, but it felt less rigid. As they organized documents, Elara suddenly asked, "Can I ask a personal question?" Arjun looked up. Possibly. A faint trace of amusement appeared. That's not very reassuring. It depends on the question. To his surprise, she almost smiled. The expression transformed her face. Not because it made her prettier. Because it made her look younger. Less burdened. The observation felt strangely intimate. He pushed it aside. What is it? He asked. Her fingers rested against the edge of a map. Thoughtful. The night in the library. His attention sharpened slightly. You mentioned anxiety. I did. How did you manage it? The question carried careful neutrality. Yet something vulnerable existed underneath. Arjun considered his response. My situation wasn't the same as yours. I know. He nodded. I went to therapy. The unfamiliar word earned a slight frown. Healing sessions, he clarified. Regularly. And it helped. Yes. The answer came without hesitation. Not immediately. He looked toward the window, choosing his words carefully. It didn't remove grief. Her gaze sharpened. It didn't erase fear. A pause. But it helped me understand what was happening. Another pause. And understanding made it easier to live with. Silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable. Thoughtful. Eventually Elara looked away. My healer says something similar. Then your healer is probably confident. That earned an actual smile. Brief. Genuine. Gone a second later. Still. It had been there. For reasons he couldn't entirely explain, seeing it felt important. Elara that night she attended her scheduled session with Master Healer Corvin. An elderly man with patient eyes and endless tolerance. How have you been sleeping? Poorly. Nightmares. Occasionally. Corvin raised an eyebrow. By your standards or mine? She sighed. Frequently. There we are. The healer made a note. Any recent panic episodes? She hesitated. One. Several months earlier she would have stopped there. Changed the subject. Deflected. Instead, she continued. In the library. Corvin listened quietly. As she described the event, she found herself mentioning Lord Vale. His distance. His calmness. The grounding exercise. The absence of pressure. When she finished, Corvin seemed thoughtful. He sounds considerate. He is. The answer arrived surprisingly quickly. The healer noticed. Of course he noticed. Trustworthy. A dangerous question. Elara stared at the floor. Finally she answered. I think so. Corvin nodded. That must feel unusual. A short laugh escaped her before she could stop it. Very. The healer smiled. For the first time in weeks, she found herself smiling back. The moment was small. Easy to miss. Yet healing often happened that way. Not through grand breakthroughs. Not through dramatic revelations. Through small moments repeated consistently. One conversation. One boundary respected. One difficult day survived. Then another. And another after that. Like rebuilding a road. Stone by stone. Slowly enough that progress became visible only when looking back. And though neither Arjun nor Elara realized it yet, that was exactly what they had begun doing. Not building romance. Not yet. Something more fundamental. A path toward trust. End of chapter 3. Chapter 4. The Shape of Safety. Echoes of the Broken Crown. Chapter 4. The Shape of Safety. Elara. Spring arrived gradually. The snow retreated from the northern hills. Trade routes reopened. Construction projects accelerated. The kingdom breathed a little easier. Not enough, but noticeably. For the first time in years, Elara found herself planning beyond immediate crises. The change should have felt encouraging. Instead, it felt strange. Survival had become familiar. Constant vigilance had become familiar. Disaster management had become familiar. Peace remained something she was still learning. Master Healer Corvin once described trauma as a castle under siege. Even after the war ended, the guards remained on the walls. Years later they still watched for enemies. Still expected attack. Still sounded alarms. The problem wasn't that the guards were wrong. The problem was that they never realized the siege had ended. She thought about that often. Especially during quiet moments. Arjun, the reconstruction initiative expanded significantly by early spring. More roads. More supply lines. More coordination between regions. Which meant more meetings. Arjun suspected at least half of governance involved attending meetings about future meetings. Some aspects of administration appeared universal across worlds. One afternoon, he found himself reviewing provincial maps with Elara in a smaller strategy chamber. The room overlooked palace gardens. Sunlight filtered through open windows. Birdsong drifted occasionally from outside. The setting felt almost peaceful. A rare thing. We should relocate the grain depot. Elara pointed toward a marked position. Arjun studied the map. Flood risk. Exactly. He nodded. For several minutes they worked in silence. Comfortable silence. A concept that had become increasingly common between them. Eventually Elara spoke again. Corvin says I should establish more routines. Arjun glanced up. The statement felt unusually personal. And what do you think? I think he asks impossible things. That surprised a laugh out of him. Her eyebrow lifted. You disagree? No. He folded his arms. I think most healers ask impossible things. To his surprise, she laughed too. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just enough to soften the room. The sound disappeared quickly. Yet its absence felt noticeable afterward. Elara, the laughter lingered in her thoughts long after the meeting ended. Not because the joke had been particularly amusing. Because she had laughed at all. There had been a time when laughter came easily. Before the war. Before funerals became routine. Before every celebration carried an undercurrent of uncertainty. Those memories often felt distant. Belonging to someone else. Lately, however, moments occasionally surfaced. Small ones. Brief ones. Master Corvin called them signs of emotional reconnection. Elara called them confusing. Still, they existed. And that mattered. Arjun, several weeks later, another problem emerged. Political pressure. Not directed at him. At Elara. The issue became obvious during a council session. A visiting noble from a neighboring kingdom spent half the meeting discussing trade agreements. The other half discussing marriage alliances. Poorly disguised marriage alliances. Arjun watched Elara's expression carefully. Not because he was personally invested. Because he recognized discomfort when he saw it. Her posture stiffened. Slightly. Her responses became shorter. More formal. The signs were subtle. Most people missed them. Unfortunately, the noble didn't. Or perhaps he simply ignored them. Surely your highness understands the importance of securing Valoria's future. A dangerous statement. Not openly disrespectful. Yet manipulative. The implication hung in the air. Everyone heard it. Silence followed. Then Elara spoke. Her voice remained calm. The future of Valoria is not dependent upon my marital status. The noble smiled politely. Of course not. However, no. The interruption surprised the room. Not because it was rude. Because it was final. Elara met his gaze directly. The subject is closed. Another silence. This one colder. Eventually the discussion returned to trade matters. But tension remained. Elara, the encounter exhausted her. Far more than it should have. Afterwards she retreated to a smaller office. Closed the door. Stared at nothing. A familiar sensation settled over her. Not panic. Not fear. Numbness. As though her emotions had withdrawn behind thick walls. The healer called it emotional distancing. A protective mechanism. Useful during crises. Less useful afterward. A knock interrupted her thoughts. She considered ignoring it. Instead, enter. The door opened. Lord Vale stepped inside. He immediately noticed something was wrong. She could tell. What surprised her was what happened next. Nothing. No questions. No concern disguised as interrogation. No attempts to fix anything. He simply placed a folder on the desk. The revised transportation reports. She blinked. Thank you. He nodded. Then paused. The council meeting was difficult. A statement. Not a question. Yes. Another pause. You handled it well. Something tightened unexpectedly in her throat. Not because the compliment was extraordinary. Because it wasn't. Simple. Specific. Focused on her actions rather than her emotions. You don't need to defend every decision you make. Arjun said quietly. Her gaze lifted. What do you mean? He considered the question. When someone ignores a boundary, reinforcing it isn't a failure. Silence. The words settled slowly. When someone says no, he continued, they don't owe an essay explaining why. For a moment she simply stared at him. Then she looked away. The idea felt unfamiliar. Almost uncomfortable. Years of politics taught the opposite lesson. Explain. Justify. Defend. Convince. The possibility that a boundary could simply exist seemed strangely radical. Eventually she nodded. I'll remember that. Arjun, that conversation stayed with him. Not because he thought it changed anything. Because it reminded him how often trauma distorted expectations. People who spent years fighting for safety sometimes forgot they deserved it. Even after circumstances changed. Especially after circumstances changed. Recovery wasn't about erasing pain. It was about rebuilding trust in reality. One small piece at a time. Elara, her next healing session occurred 2 days later. As usual, Corvin noticed things immediately. You seem thoughtful. I had a conversation. The healer waited. She described the council incident. The boundary. The aftermath. The words Lord Vale had spoken. Corvin listened carefully. Then nodded. He was correct. She sighed. Everyone keeps saying that. The healer smiled. Perhaps because it's true. I know. A pause. I just don't know how to believe it. The admission felt uncomfortable. Yet not as uncomfortable as it once would have. Corvin folded his hands. Belief often arrives after practice. She frowned. Meaning? Meaning you don't wait until something feels natural. The healer's voice remained gentle. You practice it repeatedly. Even when it feels wrong. Especially then. Elara considered that. The logic made sense. Unfortunately, many correct things remained difficult. Arjun, by late spring, another routine had emerged. Entirely by accident. Garden walks. Not formal meetings. Not private appointments. Simply conversations that happened while crossing palace grounds between responsibilities. Sometimes they discussed logistics. Sometimes governance. Sometimes books. Once they spent 20 minutes debating whether historians exaggerated the importance of great leaders. Elara argued yes. Arjun argued mostly yes. The distinction somehow occupied an entire walk. Neither seemed to mind. The conversations felt easy. Low pressure. Predictable. Grounding. Though neither of them used that word. Elara, one evening, she realized something surprising. She looked forward to those walks. Not intensely. Not romantically. Simply. Looked forward to them. The realization made her stop walking. A guard glanced at her in confusion. She continued moving. Heart slightly unsettled. Master Corvin often asked whether there were people around whom she felt safe. Her answers usually involved obligations. Trusted advisors. Healers. Childhood retainers. Important people. Reliable people. Necessary people. For the first time, another name entered her thoughts. Lord Arjun Vale. The realization wasn't dramatic. Just honest. And honesty, she was beginning to learn, mattered more than drama ever would. That night, before sleep claimed her, she reflected on the past several months. The nightmares still came. The grief still existed. The fear remained. Nothing miraculous had happened. Yet something had changed. Very gradually. So gradually she had barely noticed. When panic appeared, she knew what it was. When boundaries were crossed, she recognized it. When difficult emotions surfaced, she no longer immediately ran from them. Not always. Not perfectly. But more often than before. Progress. Small. Incomplete. Real. And somewhere amid meetings, reports, healing sessions, and garden walks, she had stopped feeling entirely alone while making it. End of Chapter 4. Chapter 5. What Remains Unsaid. Echoes of the Broken Crown. Chapter 5. What Remains Unsaid. Arjun's summer arrived with heat, dust, and an endless stream of reconstruction reports. The kingdom was improving. Not dramatically. Not in ways that inspired songs. But measurably. Road travel times had decreased. Food shortages were less frequent. Trade revenue had begun recovering. The changes were small enough that most citizens likely noticed them only indirectly. That was usually how successful infrastructure worked. When things functioned properly, people rarely thought about them. Arjun preferred it that way. Attention often complicated good work. The capital had changed as well. Market districts felt busier. Construction projects no longer dominated every conversation. People spoke cautiously about the future. Not just survival. The future. The distinction mattered. One afternoon, while reviewing provincial budgets, he found himself unexpectedly distracted. A dangerous habit. One he normally avoided. The cause sat across from him. Princess Elara leaned over a map, studying transportation routes. A lock of dark hair had escaped its usual arrangement. She appeared completely unaware of it. Arjun looked back down at his notes. The reaction annoyed him slightly. Not because attraction itself was a problem. Because he preferred understanding things clearly. For months, his regard for her had been straightforward. Respect. Admiration. Concern. Now something else existed alongside those feelings. Quiet. Persistent. Impossible to ignore entirely. He recognized it immediately. That did not mean he intended to act on it. Quite the opposite. Elara's recovery mattered. The stability she had built mattered. The trust between them mattered. Complicating any of those things recklessly would be selfish. So he did what he had done for most of his adult life. He acknowledged the feeling, accepted its existence, then continued working. Elara, the nightmares had decreased. Not disappeared. Decreased. Master Corvin considered this progress. Elara agreed. Though she remained suspicious of celebrating too early. Recovery seemed to operate according to its own rules. Good weeks sometimes preceded difficult ones. Periods of confidence occasionally dissolved without warning. Still, the pattern had improved. 3 nightmares this month. Instead of 8. Fewer panic episodes. Better sleep. More moments where she felt present instead of merely functioning. The changes were real. The realization frightened her more than she expected. Because improvement implied hope. And hope carried risk. Arjun, their garden walks continued. Mostly because neither suggested stopping. The palace gardens occupied a large section of the inner grounds. Paths wound through carefully maintained greenery. Fountains provided background noise. Flowering trees offered shade during warmer months. It had become one of the few places where Elara seemed genuinely relaxed. Not entirely. Never entirely. But closer. One evening they followed a familiar path along the western wall. The conversation drifted naturally from politics to history. Then from history to childhood. An unusual transition. Arjun noticed it immediately. Elara rarely discussed personal memories. Not because she refused. Because she seldom volunteered them. My younger brother hated lessons. The statement arrived unexpectedly. For a moment she looked surprised by her own words. Then continued. He once convinced 3 tutors that he'd fallen ill. Arjun smiled. Did it work? For almost an entire week. A faint smile touched her face. He was extremely proud of himself. The smile faded slowly. Not abruptly. Not painfully. Just naturally. Silence followed. Arjun let it remain. Eventually she spoke again. I don't talk about them often. The them required no clarification. Her siblings. Her family. The people she had lost. You don't have to. I know. A pause. But I wanted to. Something about the admission felt important. Not because it was dramatic. Because it wasn't. Trust often revealed itself in ordinary moments. The decision to share a memory. The choice to remain present afterward. The confidence that the conversation wouldn't become overwhelming. Those things mattered. Elara, the garden walk, lingered in her thoughts afterward. Not because she had discussed her brother. Because of how the conversation had unfolded. Or rather, how it hadn't. Lord Vale hadn't tried to redirect her grief. Hadn't searched for silver linings. Hadn't insisted on focusing on happy memories. He simply listened. The simplicity of that still surprised her. Many people viewed pain as a problem requiring immediate correction. As though sadness itself represented failure. Corvin often disagreed. Grief, the healer insisted, wasn't something to solve. It was something to carry. The burden could become lighter. The shape could change. But pretending it didn't exist rarely helped. Lord Vale seemed to understand that instinctively. Arjun several weeks later, political pressure intensified. This time publicly. A coalition of nobles formally proposed reopening marriage negotiations. The discussion dominated council meetings, correspondence, private conversations, rumors. Predictably, Elara hated every minute of it. Not visibly. Years of practice prevented visible reactions. Still, the signs existed. Tighter posture, less sleep, shorter patience. Arjun recognized them. So did several others. Unfortunately, recognizing a problem and solving it were different things. The issue wasn't entirely unreasonable. That made it harder. The nobles weren't trying to hurt her. Most genuinely believed they were protecting the kingdom. Intentions, however, did not erase consequences. Elara, the discussion reached its worst point during a council session near the end of summer. A senior lord spent nearly 20 minutes explaining the political benefits of marriage. Alliance security, trade advantages, dynastic stability. Every argument sounded logical. Every argument felt exhausting. By the time the meeting ended, her head hurt. She escaped as quickly as protocol allowed. The panic didn't arrive immediately. That was unusual. Usually she recognized the signs early. This time they emerged gradually. A tightening chest. Shallow breathing. The familiar sensation of being trapped. She stopped in an empty corridor. Closed her eyes. Counted breaths. Focused on the present. The techniques worked better these days. Not perfectly. Better. Footsteps approached. Her eyes opened automatically. Lord Vale. Of course. He slowed immediately, taking in the situation. The difference between now and several months ago struck her unexpectedly. He didn't ask if she was all right, because both of them knew she wasn't. Instead, would you like company? The question carried the same quiet respect as the one he had asked in the library. Choice. Always choice. She nodded. Yes. So they walked. No destination. No agenda. Just walking. The palace gardens eventually appeared ahead. The evening air felt cooler outside. Easier to breathe. For several minutes neither spoke. Then Elara exhaled slowly. I hate that they might be right. The words escaped before she could stop them. Arjun remained silent. Waiting. Not pushing. She appreciated that. The political arguments. Another breath. Some of them are reasonable. They are. His agreement surprised her. Most people either dismissed her concerns or intensified them. Rarely both. She glanced toward him. You agree. With some of the political logic. A pause. Not necessarily with the pressure. The distinction mattered. A great deal. You don't have to choose between acknowledging reality and protecting yourself. She stared ahead. The statement settled somewhere deep. Because she had spent years believing exactly that. That every difficult decision required sacrificing something essential. That duty and well-being existed in opposition. Perhaps sometimes they did. Not always. Arjun, they stopped near a fountain. The water created a soft, steady sound. Grounding. Predictable. Elara looked tired. Not physically. Emotionally. The kind of exhaustion that accumulated over years. For a moment he considered saying more. Offering advice. Perspective. Anything. Instead he remained quiet. Because she didn't need solutions. She needed space. Eventually she spoke. Corvin says I've improved. You have. Her gaze shifted toward him. How can you tell? The answer came easily. You trust people more. A faint frown. Only a few. A few is more than none. The observation seemed to catch her off guard. She looked away. The fountain continued flowing. Summer sunlight reflected across the water. After a long silence she asked, Do you ever think recovery has an end point? The question surprised him. Arjun considered it carefully. Finally he answered. No. She waited. I think some things become easier. A pause. I think some scars stop hurting as often. Another pause. But I don't think healing means becoming the person you were before. His voice remained thoughtful. I think it means building a life around what's left. The words hung between them. Neither moved. Neither spoke. Because both understood the truth inside them. Elara had lost too much to become who she had been. And perhaps that was not the goal. Perhaps the goal was something quieter. Something more realistic. Learning how to live fully despite the losses. Not because they disappeared. Because life continued. The evening sun drifted lower across the garden. Eventually they resumed walking. Neither noticed how naturally their pace matched. Or perhaps they noticed and simply chose not to mention it. Some truths required time before they could be spoken aloud. And for now, silence remained enough. End of Chapter 5. Chapter 6, Less Heavy. Echoes of the Broken Crown. Chapter 6, Less Heavy. Elara. Autumn arrived quietly. The first cool winds swept across the capital. Leaves began changing color in the palace gardens. Harvest reports replaced summer construction updates. The rhythm of the kingdom shifted once again. For the first time in years, Elara noticed the season changing before someone mentioned it. The realization caught her off guard. During the worst periods after the war, entire months had blurred together. She had measured time through crises, military reports, supply shortages, political emergencies. Now she occasionally noticed ordinary things. The scent of rain, the sound of fountains, the changing color of leaves. Master Corvin called this progress. Elara suspected healers called everything progress. Still, this one felt real. Arjun 8 months. The number occurred to him unexpectedly during a council meeting. 8 months since arriving in Valoria. 8 months since meeting Princess Elara. The realization felt strange. His previous life seemed simultaneously distant and immediate. Some mornings he woke expecting the sound of city traffic. Other days, entire weeks passed without thinking about Earth at all. The guilt remained. Not about surviving. About forgetting. His parents had existed. His friends had existed. A whole life had existed. Yet every month that passed made those memories slightly less sharp. He never spoke about it. Never would. The burden belonged to him. And despite everything, he had built a meaningful life here. That truth carried its own complicated emotions. Elara. Her healing sessions continued. Consistently. Not because she enjoyed them. Because they helped. The distinction mattered. One afternoon Corvin asked a familiar question. How have the nightmares been? Better. Define better. She sighed. Twice this month. The healer's eyebrows rose. That's significant. It still happened. Of course. Corvin leaned back slightly. Improvement and perfection are not the same thing. She hated when he said sensible things. Mostly because arguing against them proved difficult. The healer smiled knowingly. You've become more patient with yourself. I don't think that's true. It is. How would you know? I've known you for 3 years. A fair point. Annoyingly fair. Arjun. The invitation arrived unexpectedly. Not a council summons. Not an official request. A handwritten note. Simple. If you are available this evening, I would appreciate your thoughts on several border trade proposals. Elara. Arjun stared at the note for several seconds. Technically, the request was professional. Practically, she could have asked 3 different advisors. Perhaps that meant nothing. Perhaps it meant she trusted his judgment. The second possibility felt more likely. He arrived shortly after sunset. The discussion began with trade proposals. Exactly as promised. Then shifted toward regional economics. Then governance. Then books. Then entirely unrelated topics. At some point, neither noticed the transition. The meeting extended well beyond necessity. Not because either wished to leave. Elara. The palace balcony overlooked much of the city. Lights glimmered below. Distant voices drifted upward on the evening air. The trade proposals sat forgotten on a nearby table. A fact neither acknowledged. Arjun stood beside the stone railing. Relaxed. Comfortable. Not because he lacked responsibilities. Because he rarely pretended to be something he wasn't. She admired that. The thought arrived suddenly. Admired. Not respected. Not appreciated. Admired. The distinction unsettled her. For months she had carefully avoided examining certain feelings too closely. Because she wasn't ready. Perhaps she still wasn't. Yet denying their existence felt increasingly dishonest. The realization made her quiet. Arjun noticed immediately. Not because he was unusually perceptive. Because he paid attention. What is it? The question carried no pressure. She looked out over the city, searching for words, finding none. Then finally, do you ever wonder who you would have become if certain things hadn't happened? The question surprised him. She could tell. He considered it carefully. Sometimes. A pause. But I don't think there's an answer. She looked toward him. Why not? Because that person doesn't exist. The response felt characteristically Arjun. Practical. Thoughtful. Honest. He rested his arms lightly against the railing. The version of us shaped by different circumstances is mostly imagination. His gaze remained fixed on the city. We can learn from the past. A brief pause. But eventually we have to live as the people we became. Something tightened unexpectedly in her chest. Not painfully. The opposite. Because for the first time in years, the future felt slightly larger than survival. Arjun, the silence that followed felt unusually significant. Not uncomfortable. Just important. Elara remained beside him, watching the city, thinking. The setting sun painted the horizon gold and amber. Eventually she spoke. Very quietly. You know something strange? He glanced toward her. What? For a moment she seemed uncertain. Then she smiled. A small, genuine smile. I feel less heavy around you. The words hit him harder than expected. Not because they were romantic. They weren't. Because they were honest. Painfully honest. For several seconds he didn't answer, choosing his response carefully. The moment deserved care. Finally he spoke. I'm glad. The simplicity surprised her. He could see it. But he continued. You've done a lot of difficult work. Her expression shifted slightly. That's not what I meant. I know. A faint smile touched his face. But it's still true. The evening breeze stirred loose strands of her hair. Neither looked away. Not yet. I trust you. The admission arrived so quietly he almost missed it. The words carried enormous weight. Not because trust was unusual. Because for Elara, it wasn't. He understood that. Perhaps better than anyone. Something warm settled in his chest. Not triumph. Not pride. Gratitude. For being trusted with something so carefully protected. His answer came slowly. I don't take that lightly. The sincerity in his voice seemed to reach her. Because she relaxed. Just slightly. A tiny shift. Easy to miss. Yet somehow it felt more meaningful than grand declarations ever could. Elara, that night she lay awake longer than usual. Not because of nightmares. Not because of anxiety. Because she kept replaying the conversation. The trust. The honesty. The quiet understanding. There had been no dramatic moment. No sudden revelation. Just a growing certainty. Months of consistency. Months of respect. Months of feeling safe. The realization frightened her. And not in the way it once would have. The fear came from possibility. Because caring about someone created vulnerability. The same vulnerability she had spent years avoiding. Yet another thought followed close behind. A calmer one. Trusting someone was not the same thing as depending on them for survival. Caring about someone was not surrendering autonomy. Corvin had spent years teaching those distinctions. Perhaps she was finally beginning to understand them. Not perfectly. Enough. As sleep slowly approached, another realization surfaced. She no longer looked forward only to successful council meetings. Or good reports. Or peaceful nights. She looked forward to seeing Arjun. The truth settled gently. Without panic. Without denial. Simply accepted. And somewhere else in the palace, Arjun sat alone reviewing infrastructure documents. Pretending his attention remained entirely on road maintenance. A task becoming increasingly difficult. Because for the first time, admiration had begun turning into something deeper. Neither of them spoke the truth aloud. Not yet. But both had started recognizing its shape. End of Chapter 6. Chapter 7. Choosing Closeness. Echoes of the Broken Crown. Chapter 7. Choosing Closeness. Arjun, the first snowfall arrived earlier than expected. Not enough to disrupt travel. Just enough to dust rooftops and soften the edges of the city. Winter was returning. Another year nearly complete. Arjun stood beside a palace window watching snow collect along the courtyard stones. The sight still felt novel. Back in Bengaluru, winter had meant slightly cooler weather. Here, it transformed the entire landscape. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Enter. One of the palace attendants stepped inside. Her Highness requests your presence. Arjun suppressed a smile. Immediately? At your convenience. That alone told him the meeting wasn't urgent. Elara reserved immediate summons for actual emergencies. 20 minutes later, he found her in a small planning room overlooking the northern gardens. Maps covered half the table. Tea occupied the other half. A familiar arrangement. Trade routes? He asked. No. Military reports? No. Arjun sat. Then why am I here? A faint smile appeared. Because I wanted another opinion. He glanced at the stack of documents. Marriage proposals. Of course. Elara, she regretted the decision almost immediately. Not because Arjun would judge her. Because she disliked discussing the subject at all. Still, she had asked. And she trusted him. That mattered. Several moments passed while he reviewed the papers. Eventually he looked up. These are terrible. The response surprised a laugh out of her. Be diplomatic. I am. He tapped one document. This lord appears to believe listing his horses qualifies as a personality. A second laugh escaped before she could stop it. The sound felt unfamiliar, yet increasingly welcome. Arjun's expression softened. You don't have to decide today. There are political consequences. There always are. She frowned. That's not especially helpful. No. He folded the papers neatly. But it's true. The room grew quiet. Then he asked something unexpected. What do you want? The question caught her completely off guard. Because most people never asked. They asked what the kingdom needed. What alliances required. What tradition demanded. Rarely what she wanted. For several seconds she had no answer. Not because she didn't know. Because she wasn't accustomed to saying it aloud. Finally, I want to make choices because they're right. A pause. Not because I'm afraid. Something changed in his expression. Not surprise. Recognition. As though he understood exactly what she meant. Arjun, the answer stayed with him long after the conversation ended. Not because it was profound. Because it was honest. Fear had shaped so much of Elara's life. Not irrational fear. Real fear. Earned fear. The fact that she wanted something beyond it felt significant. A sign of recovery. Not completion. Movement. Later that evening, while reviewing reports in his chambers, another realization settled in. He loved her. The thought arrived without drama. Without panic. Without denial. Simply certainty. Not the idealized version people wrote poems about. The real person. The woman who overworked herself. Who carried too much responsibility. Who still woke from nightmares some nights. Who occasionally forgot meals when focused on policy discussions. Who laughed more often now than she had 8 months ago. The woman she actually was. Arjun closed the report. Then sighed. Because knowing something and acting on it were different matters. For now, he chose patience. Elara, Master Corvin noticed immediately. Of course he did. You seem happier. The accusation felt deeply unfair. I am not. The healer raised an eyebrow. Interesting. I mean. She stopped. Corvin waited. Patiently. As always. Eventually she sighed. Perhaps slightly. There we are. She resisted the urge to throw a cushion at him. Instead, she folded her arms. You enjoy this. Immensely. His smile widened. Now tell me why. Elara looked toward the window. The answer felt obvious. And frightening. Because speaking truths aloud gave them shape. Yet she had spent too many years avoiding truths already. Finally, there's someone I trust. Corvin remained silent. Encouraging. Not pushing. Just listening. Someone whose company I enjoy. The healer's expression became suspiciously knowing. She ignored it. Someone who makes difficult days easier. A pause. Not because he fixes them. Another pause. Because he doesn't expect me to face them alone. Silence followed. Long enough that she finally looked up. Corvin smiled gently. That sounds healthy. The relief she felt at those words surprised her. Not because she required permission. Because part of her had expected concern. Warnings. Caution. Instead, healthy. A simple word. Yet it eased something inside her. Arjun winter deepened. Snow covered much of the countryside. Travel slowed. Council sessions shortened slightly. For the first time in months, both of them found occasional moments of free time, which somehow resulted in more walks. Not through gardens now. Through enclosed palace corridors and covered courtyards. One evening they stopped near a glass-roofed conservatory. Snow drifted beyond the transparent ceiling. Plants filled the room with unexpected warmth and color. Neither seemed eager to leave. The conversation drifted naturally, as it often did. Books, politics, architecture. Then silence. Comfortable silence. Elara stood beside a flowering winter shrub. Thoughtful. Eventually she spoke. Can I ask you something? Usually. A faint smile. Do you ever get tired? The question surprised him. Constantly. She laughed. I meant of helping people. Understanding settled. Arjun considered the answer. Sometimes. Honesty felt important. But not because they're difficult. A pause. Mostly because I can't solve everything. Elara looked away. That bothers you. It used to. The correction seemed important. What changed? He thought of therapy sessions years ago. Of grief. Of helplessness. Of learning limits. You can care about someone without being responsible for their healing. The words hung between them. Meaningful. Because both understood the implication. Elara's gaze lowered. A subtle emotion crossed her face. Relief. Perhaps. Elara, the statement remained with her for days. Not because it was new. Because she believed him. Many people claimed similar things. Arjun lived them. There was a difference. He never treated her like a project. Never viewed her pain as something he needed to conquer. Never measured her progress as evidence of his importance. The respect inherent in that felt profound. And increasingly precious. One evening she found herself standing outside his office. An unusual occurrence. She almost turned around. Almost. Instead, she knocked. Come in. Arjun looked up from several documents. Immediately setting them aside. Not because she outranked him. Because she had his attention. The realization warmed her unexpectedly. I hope I'm not interrupting. You absolutely are. She blinked. Then he smiled. But it's preferable to road maintenance reports. A laugh escaped her. The familiar ease settled between them. Comfortable. Natural. Safe. And for the first time, Elara allowed herself to stop questioning why. Some things did not need immediate analysis. Some things could simply exist. Trust. Friendship. Affection. Whatever this was becoming. It did not require rushing. For now, it was enough to sit across from him while snow fell quietly outside the window. Enough to feel understood. Enough to know that when she looked toward the future, she no longer imagined walking through it entirely alone. End of Chapter 7. Chapter 8, When Ready. Echoes of the Broken Crown. Chapter 8. When ready, Elara, the realization arrived gradually. Which, in hindsight, suited it. Nothing about her relationship with Arjun had happened quickly. Not trust. Not friendship. Not affection. Certainly not love. The word still felt intimidating. Not because it was unfamiliar. Because she understood its weight. At 16, she had imagined love as certainty. At 24, she knew better. Love was not certainty. It was choice. Repeated. Intentional. Built through ordinary days. The understanding came during a routine council session. Nothing significant happened. No crisis. No emotional conversation. No dramatic moment. Arjun simply disagreed with her. Politely. Respectfully. Publicly. And after 20 minutes of discussion, she realized he was correct. The discovery irritated her. Mostly because it happened with annoying frequency. Yet as she watched him explain his reasoning to the council, another thought surfaced unexpectedly. She admired him. Trusted him. Enjoyed his company. Missed him when he traveled. Valued his opinions. felt safer around him than around almost anyone else. The conclusion became increasingly difficult to avoid. By the end of the meeting, she stopped trying. Arjun, the letter waiting on his desk, carried Elara's seal. Unusual. They normally spoke in person. Curious, he opened it. Would you accompany me to the Eastern Gardens tomorrow morning? No agenda. Elara, he read the note twice. Then a third time. No agenda. The phrase felt suspicious. Not alarming. Simply unusual. Still, he found himself looking forward to the meeting more than he should. Elara, Master Corvin nearly smiled himself into a medical emergency. I see. The healer folded his hands. I didn't say anything. You didn't need to. She resisted the urge to leave. Instead, she sat stubbornly in her chair. Corvin observed her for several seconds, then spoke carefully. What are you afraid of? The answer emerged immediately. Changing things. The honesty surprised her. The healer nodded. A reasonable concern. She stared at the floor. What if I lose this? The words came quieter. What if trying for more ruins what already exists? For a moment neither spoke. Then Corvin leaned forward slightly. Elara. She looked up. You spent years avoiding closeness because it felt dangerous. A pause. That made sense. Another pause. But healing sometimes asks different questions. She waited. What if closeness is no longer the danger? The thought followed her long after the session ended. Arjun, the Eastern Gardens remained largely empty during winter. Snow covered most walking paths. Bare branches stretched toward a pale morning sky. Arjun arrived first. A few minutes later, Elara appeared. No attendants. No advisors. Just Elara. Something about that immediately raised his attention. Not concern. Awareness. She joined him beside a frozen fountain. For several moments they simply walked. The silence felt thoughtful rather than awkward. Eventually she spoke. I had a conversation with Corvin. There it was. The real reason. Arjun nodded. Dangerous. A faint laugh escaped her. Usually. The sound faded. Then she grew serious again. He asked what I was afraid of. Arjun listened. Carefully. He said healing changes the questions we ask ourselves. The winter air carried away the final words. Silence followed. Long, meaningful. Arjun had a growing suspicion where this conversation was heading. He refused to assume. Some moments deserved patience. Elara, her heart was beating too fast. Annoyingly fast. She was a regent. Had negotiated treaties. Managed rebellions. Faced assassination attempts. Yet this felt infinitely more difficult. Because this mattered. Not politically. Personally. The distinction made everything harder. She stopped walking. Arjun stopped too. Waiting. Giving her space. Always. The consistency of it nearly unraveled her courage. I spent a long time believing I had nothing left to give. Her voice sounded calmer than she felt. I thought caring about people only created opportunities to lose them. A pause. The memories hurt less now. Still hurt. Less. I don't think that anymore. Arjun remained silent. Listening. Not rescuing. Not interrupting. Just listening. Exactly as he always had. The realization steadied her. So she continued. I trust you. A small smile touched his face. I know. The answer warmed something inside her. Because it wasn't arrogance. Just certainty built over time. She took a slow breath. Then another. And finally said the truth. I think I've fallen in love with you. The words entered the winter air. Simple. Honest. No grand declaration. No dramatic speech. Just truth. For a moment neither moved. Then Arjun closed the distance between them by a single step. Not enough to touch. Enough to be closer. His eyes never left hers. Elara. The way he said her name made her chest ache. In a good way. I love you too. The answer arrived immediately. Without hesitation. And somehow that felt more meaningful than anything else. Not surprise. Not confusion. Recognition. As though both had simply reached the same destination. Arjun, the silence afterward felt oddly peaceful. Neither rushed to fill it. Neither seemed interested in dramatic declarations. The important thing had already been said. Eventually Elara laughed softly. What happens now? The question made him smile. Now, she nodded. Now. Arjun considered it, then answered honestly. I think we continue. A faint frown. That's not very romantic. It wasn't meant to be. The smile returned. Larger this time. Because she understood. Continue. Not transform overnight. Not become different people. Continue. The same trust. The same respect. The same patience. Simply with greater honesty. Elara, several weeks passed before anything else changed. Deliberately. Neither wanted to rush. Neither needed to. The relationship had already spent nearly a year becoming what it was. There was no reason to sprint now. They talked. Walked. Worked. Argued occasionally about policy. Agreed occasionally about books. Life continued. One evening, they sat together in a quiet palace sitting room after a particularly exhausting council session. The conversation drifted naturally. As always. Then gradually faded. Silence settled. Comfortable. Warm. Safe. Elara looked toward him. Arjun noticed. Their eyes met. Neither looked away. A question existed there. Not spoken. Offered. Waiting. May I kiss you? Arjun asked quietly. The question made her smile immediately. Not because it was unexpected. Because it was him. Always asking. Always making space for choice. Yes. The answer came without hesitation. This time she closed the distance. The kiss was gentle. Brief. Not overwhelming. Not transformative. Simply real. When it ended, neither rushed to speak. Neither seemed interested in pretending it had changed the world. It hadn't. The world remained exactly the same. The difference was smaller. And somehow more important. They had chosen each other. Freely. Without pressure. Without rescue. Without illusion. Just two people who had spent a year learning how to trust. And decided they wanted to continue doing so together. End of Chapter 8. Chapter 9. The Circle of Trust. Echoes of the Broken Crown. Chapter 9. The Circle of Trust. Elara, the first person she told, was Master Corvin. This was not surprising. The healer had correctly predicted half the major developments of the past year. When she entered his office, he looked up from a stack of notes. You seem pleased. Elara narrowed her eyes. I haven't said anything. No. The old man smiled. You didn't need to. She sighed. I dislike how observant you are. Occupational requirement. The answer was immediate. Clearly practiced. For a moment she considered arguing. Instead, she sat down. Then said simply, Arjun and I are together. The words still felt unfamiliar. Not uncomfortable. Just new. Corvin's expression softened. Not triumphant. Not surprised. Simply pleased. I'm happy for you. The sincerity caught her off guard. You aren't concerned? The healer tilted his head slightly. Should I be? The question forced her to think. No. Then neither am I. A long silence followed. Eventually Corvin leaned back. What matters isn't whether you've entered a relationship. She waited. It's how. The answer felt characteristic of him. Annoyingly reasonable. You didn't choose him because you needed saving. No. You didn't abandon your healing. No. You didn't stop being yourself. The certainty of that answer settled warmly inside her. No. Corvin nodded. Then I see no problem. Arjun telling absolutely nobody proved significantly easier. Mostly because there was nobody appropriate to tell. His closest friendships remained professional. His secret about another world prevented complete openness. And frankly, the relationship itself still felt private. Not hidden. Private. A distinction he valued. That privacy lasted approximately 12 days. Then half the palace figured it out anyway. Not because they announced anything. Because people noticed. People always noticed. A palace contained hundreds of individuals whose survival depended upon reading social situations accurately. A subtle change in body language. A slightly warmer smile. The unconscious tendency to stand closer together. Tiny things. Yet impossible to hide forever. The first indication arrived during a council meeting. One of Elara's senior advisors handed Arjun a report, then gave him an extremely knowing look. Arjun immediately disliked that look. Elara, the political consequences began shortly afterward. Fortunately, they were less dramatic than expected. Valoria had spent years recovering from war. Most officials cared more about competence than romance. The majority response amounted to, finally, which she found deeply irritating. One advisor actually said it aloud. About time. Elara stared at him. The advisor appeared completely unrepentant. I beg your pardon? Nothing. A pause. Your Highness. The apology contained no actual apology. She could tell. Unfortunately, so could everyone else, including several council members desperately trying not to smile. Arjun, the official discussion occurred 3 weeks later. Not because protocol demanded it, because Elara preferred clarity. Several senior ministers gathered in a smaller council chamber. The atmosphere remained professional, relaxed. No one seemed particularly shocked. One minister cleared his throat. So, a pause. Lord Vale. Arjun resisted the urge to sigh. Yes. Are you aware that half the kingdom already assumes this is happening? Elara closed her eyes briefly. The minister continued. Possibly more than half. Another pause. The merchants definitely know. That somehow made the situation worse. Elara, the meeting concluded with remarkably little difficulty. The primary concern involved succession, stability, public perception, practical matters, not personal objections. Afterward, she walked beside Arjun through a quiet corridor. That went better than expected. It did. She glanced toward him. You sound surprised. I've spent enough time around governments to expect complications. The statement made her laugh. A year ago, she might not have noticed. Now she did. The way humor appeared more easily around him. The way tension eased more quickly. The way difficult days no longer felt endless. Not because they vanished. Because they were shared. Elara, her greatest test arrived unexpectedly. As significant challenges often did. A courier arrived from the northern provinces carrying military records recovered from a ruined fortress. Among them were reports from the final weeks of the Civil War. Records involving her family. The news reached her late in the afternoon. Immediately, she felt the old fear returning. Cold. Sharp. Familiar. Not because the documents posed danger. Because they represented memories. Questions. Possibly answers she had spent years avoiding. For a long time, she stared at the sealed package. Unable to open it. Unable to leave it alone. The conflict itself felt frustratingly familiar. Eventually, she sent a message. Not to Arjun. To Corvin. That decision mattered. She recognized why immediately. A year ago, she would have relied exclusively on Arjun. Or tried to. Now she understood the importance of different forms of support. The healer arrived within the hour. Together, they discussed options. Grounding techniques. Preparation. Boundaries. A plan. Only afterward did she ask Arjun to join them. Arjun, when he entered the room, the package sat unopened on the table. Corvin remained nearby. Elara looked tense. Not panicked. Tense. The distinction mattered. He immediately recognized what it meant. Preparation. Support. Intentionality. Months of healing and practice. Not perfection. Progress. Military records, she explained. Arjun nodded. Do you want to read them? A pause. Eventually. Another pause. I'm afraid to. The honesty hurt to hear. Not because it was weakness. Because it was courage. Fear acknowledged openly always required courage. Corvin spoke first. You don't have to do it tonight. Elara considered that. Then slowly shook her head. No. Her hands rested against the edge of the table. Steady. Not perfectly steady. Steady enough. I think I do. Elara, the documents took 3 hours. Not because there were many. Because she read slowly. Carefully. Several times they paused. Several times she stepped away. Used grounding techniques. Drank water. Breathed. Continued. The records answered certain questions. Raised others. Some sections hurt more than expected. One report contained details about her older brother's final command. Another included correspondence written days before his death. Reading it felt like reopening old wounds. And yet, not entirely. Because she wasn't facing them alone. Not only because Arjun sat nearby, though he did. Not only because Corvin remained present, though he did. Because she had tools now. Understanding. Language for what she experienced. Confidence that pain would not destroy her. The grief remained devastating. But it no longer felt endless. When the final document was finished, she sat quietly for a long time. No one rushed her. Eventually she spoke. "I miss them." The words came softly. Simple. True. Arjun nodded. "I know. Not they're proud of you. Not they would want you to be happy. Not any of the comforting phrases people often offered. Just, I know." The honesty felt like a gift. Arjun later that evening, after Corvin departed, he and Elara walked through the palace gardens. The air carried the first hints of spring. Winter was ending. Neither spoke for several minutes. Eventually Elara exhaled slowly. "A year ago that would have broken me." Arjun looked toward her. She wasn't exaggerating. A year ago it probably would have. Not because she was weak. Because she had fewer resources. Less support. Less healing. "You handled it well." The statement earned a faint smile. "I don't think that's the point." "No?" She shook her head. "The point is that I needed help." A pause. "And I asked for it." The pride in her voice felt entirely justified. Because she was right. That was the point. Not enduring alone. Not suffering silently. Recognizing limits. Seeking support. Continuing anyway. The skills looked ordinary from the outside. In reality, they represented enormous growth. Elara that night, lying awake beneath soft lamplight, she reflected on the previous year. The nightmares still happened occasionally. Certain memories still hurt. Some rooms still triggered unease. Healing remained unfinished. Perhaps it always would. Yet her world had expanded. She trusted people. A small circle. Enough. She laughed more. Rested more. Lived more. And when she imagined the future now, it no longer appeared as an endless series of responsibilities. It contained possibilities. Some uncertain. Some frightening. Many hopeful. Most importantly, she no longer felt required to face them alone. Not because someone would rescue her. Because partnership meant walking beside another person while remaining fully herself. The distinction mattered. Perhaps more than anything else. And somewhere nearby, in another wing of the palace, Arjun reviewed road maintenance reports with the same concentration he always brought to them. A fact that made her smile. Some things, thankfully, never changed. End of Chapter 9. Chapter 10. The Road Ahead. Echoes of the Broken Crown. Chapter 10. The Road Ahead. 2 years later, spring returned to Valoria. The kingdom looked different now. Not transformed beyond recognition. Simply healthier. Roads that had once been broken carried steady trade. Villages damaged during the war had been rebuilt. Markets bustled with activity. Fields produced reliable harvests. The scars remained visible. Some always would. But life had grown around them. That, Arjun thought, was probably the closest thing to healing most places ever achieved. Not erasing damage. Building despite it. Arjun, the title still felt strange. Prince Consort. The formal announcement had occurred nearly 18 months earlier. The ceremony itself had been surprisingly modest. At Elara's request. No excessive spectacle. No grand political theater. Just family. Friends. Advisors. The small circle of people who mattered. The marriage had generated public interest, certainly. Yet what surprised many observers was how little actually changed afterward. Arjun remained responsible for infrastructure and economic development. Elara remained regent. They continued working. Arguing about policy. Reviewing reports late into the evening. Life went on. Which was exactly what both of them had wanted. Elara, some mornings were still difficult. That reality never disappeared. Several nights each year still brought nightmares. Certain anniversaries remained painful. Some memories always would be. The difference was that those moments no longer controlled her life. Years earlier, she had believed recovery meant becoming unaffected. Corvin had spent considerable time correcting that misconception. Recovery meant adaptation, understanding, choice, not perfection. The lesson took a long time to learn. It remained one of the most important things she had ever learned. Arjun one evening, he found Elara sitting alone in the western garden. Not unusual. She enjoyed the gardens, especially during spring. The flowers had begun blooming again. Color spread across the palace grounds. Arjun sat beside her on a stone bench. For several minutes neither spoke. The silence felt familiar, comfortable. Eventually he asked, "Long day?" "A terrible day." The answer arrived immediately. He smiled. "That bad?" 3 trade disputes. A pause. 2 border disagreements. Another pause. And 1 advisor who attempted to explain economics to me. Arjun laughed. Elara's expression remained perfectly serious, which somehow made it funnier. Finally, she smiled too. The tension eased, as it often did. Elara, a few years ago, she would have hidden the exhaustion. Pretended competence required invulnerability. Now she knew better. Strength and honesty were not opposites. The realization had changed her life. Not immediately. Gradually. The way most meaningful changes occurred. She leaned back slightly against the bench. "Corvin says I should reduce my workload." Arjun winced. He's probably right. I dislike that answer. Most people dislike correct answers. That earned a laugh. The familiar warmth settled between them. Comfortable. Steady. Home. Arjun Master Corvin retired later that year. Not entirely. Healers, Arjun discovered, rarely retired completely. They simply reduced the number of people they helped while continuing to help everyone anyway. The farewell gathering remained small. Personal. At one point, the elderly healer found himself standing beside Arjun near the edge of the celebration. The older man watched Elara speaking with several advisors. She laughed at something. The sight still felt remarkable. Not because laughter was rare anymore. Because it hadn't always been possible. Corvin smiled quietly. "She's doing well." Arjun followed his gaze. "She is." The healer nodded, then looked toward him. "Thank you." The words surprised him. "For what?" Corvin considered the question carefully. "For understanding the difference between support and rescue." The answer settled heavily. "Because it touched the truth at the center of everything." Arjun shook his head slightly. "She did the work." "Yes." The healer smiled. "She did." A pause. "But having someone walk beside you matters." Neither spoke for a while after that. There wasn't much to add. Elara, years later, she would remember one particular evening. Not because it was extraordinary. Because it wasn't. No major political victory. No grand celebration. No life-changing revelation. Just an ordinary day. The sort of day she once feared she would never experience again. She and Arjun sat together on a palace balcony overlooking the city. Lights glowed below. People moved through streets. Life continued. The kingdom was stable. Not perfect. Stable. Her nightmares had become infrequent. Her panic attacks rare. Her support network strong. Healing remained ongoing. It probably always would. And that was all right. A cool breeze drifted across the balcony. Arjun sat beside her reading a report. Actually reading it. Which she found absurdly endearing. "You're working." Without looking up, he answered, "So are you." She glanced at the document in her lap. Unfortunately, he had a point. "That's different." "It isn't." "It is when I say it is." Now he looked up. The expression he gave her suggested profound skepticism. She smiled. He smiled back. Simple. Easy. The kind of moment neither would have noticed years ago. Now she treasured them. Because ordinary happiness had once seemed impossible. Epilogue kingdoms healed slowly. People healed slowly too. Neither process followed a straight line. Both involved setbacks. Both required patience. There were difficult years after the Civil War. There were difficult years after the nightmares began. There were difficult years after grief reshaped entire lives. Yet healing happened anyway. Not because pain disappeared. Not because love solved everything. Not because anyone was rescued. It happened because people chose to continue. To seek help. To trust carefully. To rebuild. Again and again. Arjun never told anyone about the world he had left behind. That secret remained his. He carried it quietly. The way people carried many things. Some losses never fully disappeared. Some questions never received answers. Life continued regardless. And in the end, that was enough. Years after their first meeting in a council chamber filled with maps and war reports, Arjun and Elara still walked through the palace gardens together. Sometimes they discussed policy. Sometimes books. Sometimes nothing at all. The conversations mattered. The silence mattered too. Because trust had been built there. Respect had been built there. Love had been built there. Not through grand gestures. Not through destiny. Through consistency. Patience. Choice. One day at a time. And as the kingdom of Valoria moved steadily into a future neither of them could fully predict, they faced it the same way they had faced everything else. Side by side. Not healed completely. Not broken. Simply human. The end.